Well, I think I'll forego self-introduction because that seems unnecessary. The title of this panel was Founding Ideas and Modern Problems. I'm going to talk about a modern problem, namely ESG, that is destructive of basically all of our founding ideas. Now, I'm a lawyer with a PhD in English, so I was a humanities guy. I came into this just going down the rabbit hole. When I started discovering what ESG was, I realized it's the most important thing happening on the planet right now, and I haven't heard a single person even talk about it at this whole conference. So what is ESG? It's an acronym that stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. The E refers to things like climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity loss, deforestation, pollution, all these kinds of things. The S refers to things like DEI, abortion, humanitarian issues. And the G refers to some things that are pre-legitimate, like, whether there's transparency and things like that. But it also principally refers to the shift from the shareholder to the stakeholder model of corporate governance. That's what I define the G as. But what does that mean? What is ESG? Well, it refers to the non-financial standards and factors that financial institutions, asset management firms, institutional investors account for when they allocate capital or assess risk. I've said before that ESG is Goliath. That's totally wrong. If it were Goliath, you could kill it with a stone. It's more like a hydra. You chop at one thing, and you got other heads here. So ESG, it involves capital markets, it involves regulation, it involves corporate America, it involves securities, it involves financial institutions, it involves your banking, your investment, it involves all these different things. So it's taking place basically in every single sector of the economy. We're projected to have $150 trillion of assets under management by next year, 2025. Well, if you go look at the Forbes list of billionaires, there are 813 in the United States, accounting for a total of $5.7 trillion. There are 2,781 in the world. Together, that accounts for $14.2 trillion. What did I just say? We've got $150 trillion of assets under management. Where does this money come from? Yeah, there are insurance assets in there, and their foundation, university foundations, for example, have their money in there. But principally, this is government money. So as I said, I thought I was going to be an English professor going and talking about Robert Frost or something, and now I'm trying to sound the alarm bells for what's going on here because it's absolutely astounding. What type of government money is getting invested? Well, state and federal pension money, sovereign wealth funds, municipal bonds, other forms of government bonds. This is how you get to $150 trillion of assets under management. Well, guess what? Three asset management firms, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, together have between 20 and $30 trillion of assets under management. The big three, as they're called, own 20% of the shares in the S&P 500. They're the largest shareholder in 90% of the companies in which they own shares. That's astounding. That's astounding. I like to tell my students, go to Yahoo Finance, click on any ticker symbol, pull it up, and find a holder that does not have BlackRock, State Street, or Vanguard in the top three. Basically, every single company that is publicly traded is owned largely by one of these three asset management firms. If you go to the Big 12, then essentially, as one of the left-wing critics of this phenomenon says, our lives and their portfolios, they own everything. The intertwining of government and asset management firms is something that goes back kind of a long way. So first of all, ESG was first articulated in a 2004 United Nations conference called Who Cares Wins. And it didn't catch on at first, but then after the financial crisis in 2008, people wanted heads to roll, people were mad at banks, and banks started using ESG as sort of a PR thing, like we can do well by doing good. And this was just a nice marketing thing for banks to make themselves look better. Well, in 2009, the U.S. Treasury Department hired BlackRock to manage the toxic assets involved in the financial crisis. The Federal Reserve allowed BlackRock to handle the debt settlement of Bear Stearns. During the pandemic, the Federal Reserve hired BlackRock to advise on how to stabilize the bond market. BlackRock has advised the British Treasury, the Swiss National Bank, the European Central Bank, the government of Greece. BlackRock owns shares of companies that own shares of BlackRock. BlackRock owns competing firms. Like, just as for example, I don't know whether they're holders of McDonald's or Burger King, I'm sure they are. But let's say that you're the largest shareholder of McDonald's and you're the largest shareholder of Burger King, and you're exercising your shareholder powers over those companies, and you're able to control essentially competing firms. That's very problematic. The way BlackRock operates is problematic. So we launched an anti-woke business program a few years ago. The beauty of doing this on Fox News was that we got to hear from a lot of executives who were calling and telling us their stories. One executive that does something in construction, I'll try to leave it somewhat vague so that this person's identity wouldn't be revealed, but he's a publicly traded company up in the Northeast. And he was telling me that BlackRock is his largest shareholder, and their representative from BlackRock came to him and said, hey, we want you to commit to net zero by 2050. He said, okay, I'll go tell my engineers to go out and see if we can do that. So the engineers went out and did science, whatever engineers do. They came back and they told the CEO, look, we can't do that. We don't have the technology to actually commit to net zero by 2050. So the CEO goes to the representative of BlackRock and says, look, my scientists are telling me we can't do that. And the BlackRock representative says, let's call him Larry. Larry, I'm not going to be here in 2050. You're not going to be here in 2050. Just commit. Just say you're going to do it. Who cares? And the guy, to his credit, said, well, I was general counsel of this company before I was CEO, so I know that we've got a long paper trail here saying that we can't actually commit in good faith to net zero by 2050, so sorry, that's your answer. But if you want to buy carbon credits out of our profits, if you want to use some of the profits and forego some of that money, to buy carbon credits, we're happy to do that for you. They said, no, let's not do that. We want to keep our money. BlackRock is sort of a revolving door with the Biden administration and government. Another big player in the story of ESG are proxy advisory firms, ISS and Glass Lewis. They have basically a duopoly. They advise on how shares get voted. Typically, they vote in ways that are counter to the interest of social conservatives. So for example, if you want to get good ESG ratings, there are all these ESG ratings companies, what might you do as a firm? Well, you might pay to have your employees cross state lines to get an abortion somewhere else. You might offer that as a service. That might be one way you get a positive check on your S. Or you might have DEI mandates throughout your company. That would give you good scores under the S. So other examples of where this is taking place. So the Biden administration issued an executive order in 2021 that applies to the National Economic Council, the Department of Treasury, the Financial Stability Oversight Council, which includes the Federal Reserve Board, the SEC, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, the Office of Management and Budget. So all of these major institutions that control the flow of capital have these ESG mandates and DEI mandates applied to them. Well, what does the Federal Reserve do? The Federal Reserve partners with 6 large banks to consult on how to comply with the executive order. So Bank of America, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, they all get hired by the Fed to advise them on how to comply with this ESG mandate. There is a new SEC reg that requires publicly traded companies to disclose all this ESG data if they want to remain publicly traded without penalty. There's an even more disturbing one in Europe called the EU Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and this applies to not just the company reporting its own data, not just reporting the ESG data with the companies it contracts with, but reporting the ESG data for every single company all the way down the supply chain. This is billions and billions and billions of dollars of waste. All this information is already publicly available, so any investor can have that and go look for it and can find it if they want to. But this reporting requirement is essentially for people that know public choice. It's a public choice issue. The biggest firms love this. They lobby for it because they want to get bigger. They want to exclude the competition. So all these incumbent firms that are afraid of small up-and-coming firms, they actually want these regulations because they know that they can absorb the cost, where smaller firms can't. They can't afford the regulatory compliance costs. So is this making sense? The way it works is when you invest money in these ESG weighted portfolios, then then there are ETFs, mutual funds, all these things that screen out companies from their funds. There's a new SEC names rule that was instituted. What happened is ESG funds were actually performing pretty well during the pandemic. Turns out that all these ETFs actually didn't have ESG stuff in it. So if it was performing well, it's because they just call it ESG, but there was nothing ESG. This is called greenwashing. The new SEC names rule requires that 80% of the securities in a portfolio actually match how what the portfolio is advertised as. So if you call a fund ESG, at least 80% of your securities in that fund have to actually be ESG. You've probably heard of debanking. ADF is sort of on the forefront of pushing back against this debanking phenomenon. This is where people, sometimes conservative activists, are finding that they have lost access to capital. The banks are shutting their bank accounts down and not letting them bank there anymore. Someone like Nigel Farage is a prominent example of something like that. But debanking is not merely an exclusion, but it's a force that shapes behaviors and norms in the economic sphere. It makes financial institutions arbiters of social and political acceptability, and they wield the power to grant or deny access to capital. Closing accounts belonging to conservative organizations or to gun manufacturers or to individuals deemed politically desirable isn't merely just a denial of service, it's a performative act that demarcates the boundaries of acceptable economic citizenship. It's a way to reinforce societal norms through financial mechanisms. So this is not merely prohibitive, but it's generative power. It's creating new categories of financial deviance and shaping the conduct of individuals who must navigate this normative landscape to maintain their economic viability. So this is very frightening stuff, and it's happening all over the place. ESG is underperforming. I remember hearing a commentator from Mercer Financial on NPR of all places talking about how ESG is performing. There are now increasing studies that are showing ESG is performing, but you have to realize there's a ton of money behind this ESG industry. The BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, they have more assets under management than most governments have money. This is an astounding amount of power. And it's one thing if you're an individual, a private individual, and you want to invest your money in an ESG fund, great, fine, nothing stops you. I personally think we have charity and philanthropy, and those are better means of supporting causes that you want to advance. But for those who want to invest their money in an ETF that has ESG in it, then that's fine. There's no big issue. But imagine this: when you're investing this pension money, say you've got a bunch of kindergarten, elementary school teachers who are teaching in public schools or whatever, and they may be Christians, and they have no idea that their pension money is being used to inadvertently support causes like abortion or like any variety of LGBTQ plus causes. That is wrong. Especially when they're mandatory, and you can't get out of it. You can't exit from that pension system. Your money is being put into that no matter whether you like it or not. After the Janus case in 2018, we know that these mandatory union dues are an issue. We think we really need to have more people bringing First Amendment cases. So if you know state employees who are Christian or conservative or whatever, who would be willing to serve as a plaintiff, let me know. We can hook them up with some good attorneys because this needs to stop. There are a lot of things happening at the state level to push back. In Alabama, we had a bill that prohibited the use of public money, in short, to enter into contracts with companies that are doing ESG. The way they call it an economic boycotts bill. I don't like the term because it makes it sound a little protectionist in the sense that we're not going to let state money be used to do business with companies that are undermining agriculture or firearms or mining or anything that is popular in the Alabama economy. But really what it is it's a restriction on the use of public money to go to ESG. So I've actually favored this bill. I went and testified at the State House about it. That night I was having dinner with Sam Gregg in Montgomery. The head of the Alabama Bankers Association called me up, threatened to get me fired, threatened all types of things, and it was amazing. It was absolutely incredible. The very next day I texted a friend at the Heritage Foundation and I said, hey Andy, I'm feeling kind of alone here. It was me and Alpha, the Alabama Farmers Federation. They supported the bill. It was modeled off some language we worked with Governor DeSantis' office. And I said, Andy, I'm feeling kind of alone here. And he put out an all call. I pretty much started getting these phone calls from think tanks all over the country saying, what can we do to help? Before the day was out, I had an army behind me. I had people in DC writing op-eds and the blah, 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 some local papers, all across Alabama. So it was exciting to have friends kind of jump to the rescue. But we are starting to have some successes. We're pushing back. Unfortunately, it's too early to spike the football, although you'll see headlines like this, ESG investing is dying. That's not a bad thing, CNN. ESG investing is dying on Wall Street. Here's why, CNN. ESG will fail unless it moves focus from box ticking to action, the Times London. ESG is on its way out, the New York Post. You see these things all the time, but it's way too early. With this new EU directive, with the SEC rule, we have Department of Labor rules. We basically have encoded elite preferences all the way through the administrative state, and in particular, in those agencies that control capital flows. And what do we know about money? It's everywhere. People buy and sell everything, And so if you can capture the capital flows, you influence all of society. And this is happening right out there in the open. If you go to the ESG, to the UN Who Cares Wins conference, it's co-sponsored with the government of Switzerland. It lists a roadmap. It's not like it's hidden. It's right out there, public PDF document. And you can read it. It gives you a step-by-step. This is how we're going to institute this. And guess what? Over 20 years, they did. So it's going to take us at least 20 years to start walking these things back. I'm excited about a new administration. This is what my little abstract for this talk said, because I tried to use the ESG issue to thread the needle between the libertarians and the NatCons. But so the abstract goes like this: globalization has not transformed our bounded nature as situated human beings, tied to distinct communities, communicating with preferred languages, and identifying with specific traditions and cultures. Even expats, drifters, vagabonds, and the deracinated have their prejudices and partialities. A place that feels more like home than elsewhere, a language that is easier to speak, manners and mores that are more familiar, discrete groups with whom they enjoy an association. The ESG movement, however, has as its end global governance. This is a term that the World Economic Forum promotes. It's all over the academic literature, and it circulates widely in universities. ESG involves coordination between governments and private finance, investing, and banking to stamp out cultural pluralism and institute a managerial system of grand standardization, including unified laws and regulations across national borders. In the face of the overwhelming, if aspirational, global governance, which, using ESG investment, has the potential to control capital flows throughout the West, individuals may feel that they lack the agency or ability to facilitate change, resist, or direct the quotidian elements of their jobs and careers. They may feel isolated, alienated, disempowered, and insignificant under forces too powerful to oppose. ESG erodes their sense of local and regional culture, of generational attachments, family pride, and the customs and traditions that constitute their lived experience. So ESG has this major psychological effect on people, and we don't even know that it's doing it, because Heritage Foundation polled a bunch of Americans about ESG, and guess what? Almost nobody knows what it even is. And it affects everyone in this room. If you have a mutual fund, you're probably subsidizing causes that you don't like. So I mentioned that I thought I would be talking about Robert Frost one day, and I'll end with Robert Frost. Everybody knows this poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, but it goes like this. Whose words these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his wood fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop at a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. and miles to go before I sleep. So the speaker of this pump, there's this old man out there in the woods, and the darkness is bad, but it's also tempting. He wants to give up. It's so tempting to just give up and stay out there. But he has miles to go before he sleeps, and we have miles to go before we sleep, all of us in this room, and we need to walk it together. I love that we're here at ISI. I love that we're here after an astounding election, and we should all go out and celebrate, drink together, have fun, but realize that we're part of a bigger purpose, and we need friends, we need to unite, and let's use this occasion to do that. Thank you very much. We don't have time for questions, by the way. We're done.